Okay, excellent. So I am so excited to see all of you today and have so many faces in the room. I'm really excited to bring this knowledge and this content to you. My name is Jaylyn Jones. I am one of the assistant directors of residence life at the University of North Florida. And social justice has been something that has been a passion area of mine for quite some time now. I spent a lot of time really getting into the field because I wanted to be essentially a social justice practitioner, not a student affairs practitioner. And I came in and I was super excited and I was like, I'm going to grad school. We're going to talk about social justice and everybody else knows about social justice and it's going to be great and we're going to educate the students. And that was not what happened. Not quite, at least. I came in with this assumption and this notion that everyone was going to know how to do it really, really well. And there's some people that know how to do it really, really well. And there's some of us that could use a little work, and I think we're all growing and improving together. So really the name of this presentation, or what it sparked and inspired Stop Crowdsourcing, Start Creating, was show of hands, who has seen on the Student Affairs page, the Res Life Professionals page, someone post, does anyone have any good diversity activities? Who's seen this? Yes, yes, I'm seeing some chuckles, some nods, and every time I see that, I'm like, just any diversity activity? Any activity for anyone on any topic, for any group of it, any activity. Well, sure, how about you give me some more information? And really, I think we could have, if I had to go back and do it over again, I would have probably retitled this, Stop Crowdsourcing, Start Curating. Oh, we like that word, we like that word. And so when we talk about curating, I was like, what does curating actually mean? Turns out there's some clergy definition I didn't know about. But it also means carefully chosen and thoughtfully organized or presented. And I think this is what we're oftentimes missing when we start doing that. Does anyone have any good social justice activities? It's not carefully chosen or thoughtfully organized. And so I'm not saying if you are one of those people, we are not shaming you for posting in the Essay Pros group asking for activities. That's not bad. But how do you do that more effectively? How do you start crafting those activities in a way that makes sense for your staff, for your team, for the group that you're presenting it to, for your time constraints? So instead of just saying, all right, I found some stuff on the internet, let me just grab that and throw it into a training, how do you really creatively and effectively make that work for your intended purpose? So I am going to make an assumption, and my assumption could be incorrect. If it's incorrect, I apologize. But I am, for the purposes of today, going to assume that we have all been to some sort of diversity or social justice training. Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Amazing. I would like for you to meet somebody else in the space, turn to a partner or a friend, and tell them about your best or worst facilitation experience. Go ahead and do that now. Meet a friend. Hello. Okay, let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. Start wrapping up your conversations. Glad we got to meet a friend, chat with a neighbor. Awesome, awesome. Let's wrap it up, wrap it up. Thank you. Were there any ones that stood out that people would like to share about their facilitation experiences, either training you participated in, facilitated, good, bad, or otherwise? Yes, over here.
My first year as grad student, we were in professional staff training. We had our interlocal affairs office facilitate a diversity training, and so they started by saying, all right, so everybody who identifies as white on this side, everybody black on this side, and we had a Latinx person on our department, and so our identity was not factored in at all, so it made it super awkward.
Yeah. I can see how that could be super uncomfortable. What else? What other experiences have we had? Yeah?
So we didn't have exact experience.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about how it's obvious when somebody isn't qualified to do the training. And so that can be frustrating, especially if you're someone who has background.
Yeah.
Don't know how to have hard conversations, or they don't know how to facilitate it in a way that is beneficial to everyone.
Yeah. What are some positive experiences folks have had, if any? Yes, over here.
So just this last December and January, my department brought in an outside consulting firm
Mm-hmm.
to do implicit bias training for us, specifically an 8-hour training for us over 2 days. And I thought that was phenomenal because
Nice.
they specifically going to people who are like, this is their whole experience and job, not someone who's just maybe serving in an intercultural affairs at the university, which I mean, no big within, but like their whole job is to consult for diversity.
Right. You've got someone that's a really in-depth subject matter expert, and that adds a different layer to the experience. Oh, one last hand over here. Yeah.
We brought in somebody from our Multicultural Leadership Development Center into a staff meeting because we had a smaller group and we just let the RAs ask any questions, like method, or like whatever you want to know or you think you need to know, just ask. And it was kind of that space for them to open up because where we're at, a lot of students, we have a great privilege and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, these things. So
Yeah.
that was a really positive experience for them and opened up the door for further conversation.
Yes, I love that. I love these examples. And so in our positive examples, I noticed that in both instances we brought in some outside folks. This is my reminder to you, if you ever needed permission, you are also the folks. It's a professional competency. Not a professional passion area, not a professional hobby. Social justice and inclusion is something that is required of us to be competent in our work. Not special or excelling, but competent. Like, this is a baseline expectation of who we are and what we do. So absolutely lean on your resources, but also if every time there's an opportunity to facilitate or train, you're like, ooh, let me call somebody else. I don't know that. But the competency says you should be able to effectively facilitate dialogue, right? You should be able to design programs and events that are inclusive, promote social consciousness, and all those other words up there that you can read. This is work that we should be doing, and I want to help you figure out how to do it better. So one of the big things when you first are starting out and trying to figure out how do I best find what my team needs and giving them those trainings, we got to start with needs assessment. I think this is one of the biggest things that are missing from some of our training designs is that we're not looking at what do folks need to learn, what do we need them to do. We're just like, diversity, good. Social justice, good. So I will teach them something, and then they'll be better somehow. So if I just find an activity on privilege, if I find an activity on like race or racism or something, anything's better than nothing, right? But if they can't use the knowledge, what's the point? So there's a few different ways that you can do needs assessment, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but a lot of this content from this training and kind of where I gained my knowledge base was from taking social justice education and training. It was a semester-long course in my graduate program at Bowling Green State, taught by Ellen Broido. Phenomenal professor, phenomenal class. But part of that was doing a training for a unit on campus. So we did a lot of things, and you'll see pieces of work from a training we created for all of the academic advisors on campus, and part of that was doing needs assessment so that we weren't just giving them random stuff. Needs assessment can look like a lot of different things. There are some folks who like to do surveys. So you might send out a Qualtrics survey, Google Forms, whatever the survey platform of your choosing, to your staff to figure out where is their knowledge base and where are some of those gaps, or maybe even what are things that they want to learn more about and don't feel comfortable assessing. Pro of surveys, it gives you some really concrete, tangible data to say, here's where our staff's knowledge base is, here's where their self-assessment is, here's why we need this thing. So if you've got folks in your department that are maybe a little more hesitant to make time for this during your trainings or during in-services or things of that nature, here's how, surveys give you good stuff to really back it up. Downside of surveys is it's a little more tricky to get the response rate that you're looking for sometimes, and some of that in-depth probing that you might want to do, harder to do a little bit on a survey. Focus groups, also really great if you have any sort of like student staff advisory council or board of students that you meet with or someone on your senior staff meets with. So I have a crew that I meet with. We have What's the Tea with the AD on a monthly basis, and so I meet with a group of students. And so that would be a great focus group for our department, is to really ask them questions. Con of a focus group, you don't necessarily get the full picture of your entire staff, and sometimes you can run into some groupthink of people being like, well, all the other 9 people that are here said it's fine, so I don't want to be the person that says otherwise. And finding the time to schedule that, a little hectic, a little tricky sometimes, especially in the spring, we busy. Interviews are great, but they can be time consuming. So when we worked with the academic advisors on our campus, we did individual interviews with the directors of some of those heads, which was fascinating, very interesting. I think if we had more interviews with the people that they supervise, that perspective might have been a little different. So with interviews, you do get the level of depth, but you sometimes only get one perspective. And then especially with student staff, though this information is applicable to pro staff, student staff, RHA, NRHA, to anybody you really want to teach, informal assessment is great. We're going to practice one right now. One of my favorite informal assessments is a fist to 5 assessment. So it's a great way of checking and reading your room and understanding where your knowledge base is. So you're going to give me a fist if you were like, I know nothing about facilitating social justice trainings. I know nothing at all. I came because I know nothing. I've never done it. I've never created one. I just attend them. You're going to give me a 5 if you're like, I could have given this presentation. I just wanted to see what you had to say, sis. I just came to support you and see if you had some new stuff. But I feel really confident. Maybe you've worked in a multicultural affairs office. You facilitate all the time. You're like, this is my jam. This is my bread and butter. I could do this professionally, and I want to do this professionally. Any number in between. Maybe a 2 is like, I have done some stuff. I'm definitely not a pro. I kind of feel like I maybe know some things, but I could learn some more. Where are we at? Show of fingers. Okay, we have a really broad mix. I see lots of 2s, lots of 3s. Okay, I see you 5. Appreciate the support. I see you 5. Let's go. Thank you. So that helps me figure out, as we go through these things, what are some pieces that I'm going to need to hit on stronger, and maybe what are some things where I know that we can kind of go forth and conquer and do great things because we already know. Informed assessments might also come in the form of some worksheets that might come in the form of some self-assessment. You might have some casual conversation with students. I love leaving my office door open, and I will just like find random RAs as they go to check their mailbox and be like, come here. What's going on with this? What are your thoughts? They don't know it's assessment, so they tell me all the real truth. So once you figure out sort of what topical areas you want to delve into, you're able to assess your design in what we're calling a design analysis grid. This is very fancy and very large. You do not need to take a photo of this particular grid because I've pared this one down a lot. So when I learned it, I learned 4 different content paradigms and 7 different process paradigms, and it was a lot of information to try to teach people in 1 hour. I'm not going to teach you all that. We got the basic version. If you would like to go in depth, call me. I'll hook you up. So content paradigms refer to what are we teaching people. So today we're going to look at 4 specifically different ways of looking at your content and whether or not it's going to hit the needs of your staff, your students, or your participants. Process paradigms is the how. How are we teaching people? What strategies are we actually using to help them learn? And do we have them set up in a way that makes sense for what we're trying to teach? That third chunk of columns is where you would plot your learning outcomes. And so really thinking about if activities go down this side here, and you'll see one later that's fully filled out, how is each activity that you're doing hitting on each of your learning outcomes? Because sometimes we spend some time, we're like writing like really fire learning outcomes, we're using big words, we got Bloom's taxonomy out, we're very excited, it sounds great. And then we make up a bunch of activities and they don't necessarily go with the pretty learning outcomes we made. Or we get the activity first and then we try and go back and write the learning outcome because somebody said we needed the learning outcome to put it in the schedule. So we made up some stuff and it also still doesn't match. This is your check. This is a way, it's really just a tool of saying, did I do all the things that I needed to do? It will make more sense as we delve in further and break down each of these things. So we'll start with our content paradigms. So our what of our social justice trainings. The first content paradigm is what aspect of social justice are we hitting on? Are we trying to teach people difference? So that first level of like, hey, different people have different identities and different backgrounds and viewpoints. This is kind of sort of your base level, your introductory level of here's just intro. I'm different than you, you're different than me. People have different lived experiences. That second level is dominance. That's when we start having conversations about privilege. That's when we start having conversations about power. That's when we start having conversations about how someone's identity impacts their lived experience. And then your third aspect is change. And it's really important that we hit on all of these in our trainings. A lot of times we get stuck at dominance. So we have all of these trainings over and over again. We're like, we're different. Different is okay, but it also impacts lived experience. And people are like, wow, that sucks. And then you just get kind of stuck in the swamp of despair. You're like, the world is kind of a terrible place. Racism is bad. I don't know what I do about that. But yes, I am now aware as a result of this training that racism is bad. We have to give them action steps and ways to fix it, or at least an opportunity to hope for a better future. If we get stuck here, that's not always helpful. It can be sometimes harmful, especially to your students of marginalized identities in those conversations, to be like, yes, I am aware. Thank you for reminding me again that the world is working against me. Difference is also a bad place to get stuck. Because if we're only ever talking about like, I'm different than you and you're different than me, and that is okay, we never talk about the real impacts of those things. So when you're sequencing your training, you're really looking at, am I hitting on all of these aspects? And they should essentially move from left to right. Your second is your outcomes. So we have awareness, knowledge, and skills. These don't necessarily have to be sequenced in your training, so they don't need to come in this specific order. But you should be hitting on all these aspects. So awareness is really just people's attitudes and perceptions and understanding of who they are. Awareness is an internal, personal aspect. So really like, am I able to recognize things that are happening in the world? Am I aware of my bias? Am I aware of my privilege? Am I aware of how I impact other people? Awareness. Knowledge is that subject matter knowledge. Do I understand the history of a particular group of people? Do I understand the needs of a particular group? What information do I have about this group? And then that skill development is really, how do I put this into practice? How do I interact with people from a different group? What language do I need to use? Are there things that I should be mindful of when interacting with people from these groups? Where we often get trapped in our outcomes is sometimes we go straight to skill development because our staff is like, what am I supposed to do? Tell me the words I'm supposed to say. What is the language? What do I do if I encounter a person with disabilities? Just like, tell me and I will do it. The problem is if we jump straight to skill development, when those staff members are challenged on why they should do that, they don't have the knowledge and awareness to support it. And so their follow-up and interactions with other people are just, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to say that. You can't do this. You can't say that. That's bad. But if they can't understand why they shouldn't be doing those things or should be doing those things, we miss out on that learning. Same thing if we get stuck at awareness and people are like, I am so aware of my biases. I know that it's very inappropriate for me to do certain things. I didn't change my behavior, but I want you to know that I'm very aware that this is inappropriate. You may know some of those people. I see some chuckles. I went to grad school with some of those people. No shade to the people I went to grad school with, but there are lots of folks that are like, I'm just very passionate about social justice. I'm not going to change how I interact with you or treat you any better, but it's so important. So important. So important. If we get stuck at knowledge and we're like, we are going to have all these culture fairs, we're going to teach people all sorts of things about different cultures and different backgrounds and different identities, it's going to be great. But if they don't understand how their bias impacts how they process information or why they never learned that information in the first place, less helpful. If they don't change their behavior as a result of gaining that knowledge, less helpful. My students all the time are like, we want to have a culture fair. Wouldn't it be so awesome to see all these different cultures come together and then they could bring their food and do their dances and like sing their songs and wear their clothes? It would be amazing. I'm like, yes, you've essentially created an event where you're saying, please entertain me, feed me, teach me, dance for me. I'm not going to change how I treat you, but I appreciate the tamales. Thank you. So we got to hit all three. And then when we talk about level of oppression, so are we talking about individual interactions, which especially with our RA staff, we tend to hit on that about how do you talk to people? How do you interact with people? How do you treat people? We also need to be talking about what does institutional oppression look like? If we get stuck at just the individual, then they're like, cool, all I have to do is be nice to people. If I'm a kind person and I'm a kind individual and I treat other people with love and compassion and respect, the end. I've done all of the things. And if everybody just was like kind and loving and compassionate, social justice, done. But there are institutional factors at play, and we also want our students to learn and understand those. There's a lot harder to like break down and wrap your head around than like the individual things of like, cool, I know that I need to say and do and be and believe these things. How do you start like taking on the institution of higher education and helping, and so especially because sometimes it's messy, to be like, cool, you as an RA can change your behavior, but the institution we are at has policies and practices that just don't support people of certain identities. It's messy. And then you also have those societal and cultural pieces that you want to hit. So level of oppression does not need to be sequenced, so you don't need to go individual and then institutional and then societal and cultural, but you do want to make sure you're addressing all of these pieces. And I want to remind you that all of these don't need to happen at the same time in the same training. This might happen over your semester. This might happen over the course of your year. But as you think about what are we trying to teach them, these are factors you want to consider. Oh, before we do our check for understanding, we're going to do a quick review of what has to be sequenced and what doesn't. Aspect of social justice. We want to sequence these things. We want to build upon one another. So we want to teach them about difference, then dominance, then get them to change. Because if we jump straight to action steps, they're like, wait a minute, people are different, there's impacts, we're concerned. Outcomes do not need to be sequenced, but we want all of them in the mix. Level of oppression, again, does not need to be sequenced, but we want all of those things in the mix. So we're going to do a quick check for understanding. Some of you may be familiar with Kahoot. We're not doing a Kahoot because I would have to leave this presentation slide and it's the whole thing. We're not doing that. But I did find SEAHO. So if you would like to join our quiz at slido.com using the event code SEAHO20, same concept. We still get to check your understanding and quiz you on your knowledge. However, I don't have to go to the computer and do lots of weird things. But I do miss the fun Kahoot music. So just imagine that it was playing. Oh, okay, cool, cool, cool. People are joining. This is amazing. We're getting there. My name is only in there because I tested this earlier to make sure that it would work. I don't know how to get rid of it, but Slido is great. She's free. It's a Google Chrome extension, and you can embed quizzes and polls straight into any Google Slides presentation. So if you learn nothing else from me today, you got a new trick. And you can have a maximum of 100 people in a quiz. Yeah, so you can get you a nice big group. I have no idea how many of us there are in this room. So I'm gonna give people another second or two, and then we're gonna keep it moving. Some of these names are very interesting. Whoever believes they are the best Leo is incorrect. I'm just saying, that would be me. I'm just throwing it out there. You could be a really, really good Leo. I'm gonna be very embarrassed if that's just a person named Leo and not an actual Leo. All right. Okay, if you're not in, you missed it. I'm so sorry. So a cross the line or step into the circle activity. So one of those where you would read the prompt and ask students to step into a space based on whether or not they identify with that prompt. Does that hit on difference, dominance, or change? And if you feel like there might be more than one where it could, what's the primary one that you feel like it addresses? I think we're at 55. I think that's everyone. Cool, difference. We had some folks who said dominance. The reason why it's not necessarily dominant, sometimes it depends on how you facilitate that. If you are just asking people to cross and step in and identify, you're not necessarily identifying which of those identities is marginalized or which ones aren't. You're just saying who in our space has these identities or has these experiences. So you're not quite hitting on dominance just yet, but it's a lot of focusing on how are we different. So an inclusive language workshop primarily addresses which outcome. So a workshop where you're teaching participants about how to use inclusive language, what language they should be using or not using. What outcome are we getting at? It really hits different without the music. I also keep forgetting that I'm being recorded and people will be able to watch this back. Oh, okay, we got two more. Two. If you're the final person, the time is now. Hey, there we go. Okay, we had a bit of a mix here. It does, in some regards, touch on all three, in the sense that you are raising participants' awareness of the language that they are currently using. It does touch sometimes on knowledge because you need to teach new terminology at times to be like, what are the things? You might be introducing folks to new words. They might not have heard those things before. And then the skill building of practical things and behaviors you want them to change. However, the primary focus is the skill piece. Because the goal is not for them to leave that workshop being like, I know these new terms now. It's the behavior change. It's the skill. Okay, we got a couple more. If you didn't get that one, you could rebound. So a lunch and learn about the life of Rosa Parks would be focused on which outcome? Awareness, knowledge, or skills? We are almost there. Part of that final three, just commit. It's too late. You've missed your chance. Okay, so we had a lot of folks in knowledge. For our folks who said awareness, if you were someone that said awareness, what was your thought process? Yeah.
For me, simply awareness of like the civil rights movement, awareness of what happened. For me, knowledge is connected to awareness, so I was just like, this is just making you aware of this situation. But obviously, I also be knowledgeable of. That's typically what a lecture learn is for.
Yeah. So I think that's a good distinction, and I'm glad we're having this moment of clarification. So when we talk about awareness and participants' awareness as an outcome, it's about my personal behaviors, beliefs, my personal viewpoints, my personal privileges. Awareness is about me, my attitudes. It could also be about the attitudes of other people, but it's about individual attitudes and beliefs, not so much subject matter information. So if I could Google it, it's knowledge. Somebody can't like Google my attitude towards a thing. But the civil rights movement, we can Google. Does that make sense? Yes.
I can completely agree with you. I think where I click the knowledge, but I see where there's this connection here because I think there's this piece of having this, how do you explain the history that's been taught in the United States about what happened and get the knowledge to what actually really happened, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Still knowledge.
I know,
Yeah.
Still knowledge,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So you're always going to have some interlocking and connected pieces. So as you're trying to figure out and assess what is this activity getting at, the goal is always like, what is the primary thing? What is the big piece at the forefront? Because you're going to have some tangential pieces. You're going to have some awareness pieces as people are learning perhaps about the civil rights movement, then being like, oh, this impacts my understanding of how I came to be in this space. Good dialogue. And I think this is the last one. So a simulation activity about how socioeconomic status impacts college admissions focuses on which level of oppression, individual, institutional, or societal, or cultural.
Which frame are you taking with institutional?
Tell me.
Institutional as being systemic or societal. I gotta guess.
Yeah. No, good dialogue is happening. Good learning. If you're one of the final two, commit. It's too late to commit. Okay, so we had a couple folks who said individual. We've got some institutional as well as some societal and cultural. I think the big thing to remember here is if you feel like you got the wrong answer, I'm not going home with you. I am not going to be in your office looking over your grid being like, that is the wrong answer. How you choose to define things and make meaning, because a lot of this stuff is nuanced. I could give you a specific list and definition and be like, these are the things that are institutions, and these are the things that are societal and cultural. But if it doesn't make sense for you, for your campus, for your community, if it doesn't click and resonate for you, I'm not gonna give you a tool that you need to like go home and like flip through notes every time you wanna use it. But really, what resonates for you and what definitions make sense for how you wanna define things, as long as you're consistent in how you're using them and still hitting on all of these things. So if you defined everything as institutional and not societal and cultural, and you never talk about the societal and cultural, that doesn't work. But if my definition of institutional, which would include higher education, is something you would view as societal and cultural, as long as you're still hitting the institutional elements, amazing. So yes, we actually built the simulation based on this framework. So it was a great time. We were like, there's nothing out there that exists, so we created one. So if you're interested in that, hit me up. True or false, level of oppression should be sequenced when developing training. So that was that one that we just looked at, individual, institutional, societal, and cultural. Does it need to be sequenced or no? We have more commitment. We've got more conviction in this one. I'm feeling really good about this. Final 3, commit. Or maybe your phone died. Maybe there is no final 2. Maybe that's, and we've been waiting on people that were never going to come. That's it. Okay, most of us were on the same page, but as a reminder, they do not need to be sequenced. They absolutely can. If that makes sense for your training to sequence them, cool, amazing, you can do that. You don't need to sequence them though. It's not necessary that institutional has to build on and relate directly to societal and cultural. You can pull apart different pieces if it makes sense for that training at that time. I don't know why it said no one participated, so yay for these people who got questions right. You gotta be quicker than that. So we're gonna put it into a little more practice thinking about it in that grid format that you saw at the top of the presentation. So, like I said before, you're gonna have your activities going down on the left. For the purpose of our practice, these activities are not happening in one training. I would be very concerned if you were trying to do all of that as one thing. And then we're gonna go across with the aspects, the outcomes, and what level it's hitting at. So for a sort of step into the circle activity, again, this is primary, is that hitting on difference, dominance, or change? Hey, there you go. And one of the things that I noticed as I was building this presentation, I learned it with numbers. If it makes more sense for you to use the words themselves, do that. Outcomes is a step into the circle. We're looking at awareness, knowledge, or skills. Yeah. What level are we looking at? Individual, institutional, or societal and cultural? Hey, look at us go. For a culture fair, they're dancing, they're singing, they're serving us baklava. Is it difference, dominance, or change? Hey, what about our outcome? Knowledge. Our level? It's in the name, hey! For an Archie Bunker simulation, if you're not familiar with that activity, you get various identities you're trying to navigate in the world of Archie Bunker's neighborhood. Are we talking about difference, dominance, or change? Hey, yeah. What outcome? Awareness. There is some knowledge in there, but we're not necessarily teaching or lecturing on like, here's redlining as a concept, but we're trying to impact participants' awareness of what is it like to live as a different person? What is that identity experience? Not necessarily something you would find in a history book or textbook. What level are we getting at? You can do 2/3. That's the other thing about the grid. You can have slashes. I put 2, but you can have 2/3. An inclusive language workshop. What are we getting at? Change. What outcome? Skills and knowledge, like we talked about earlier. You could have slashes. You could have blends. They're learning new terms. What level? I can't remember what I put. So For the workshop that I had in mind, I was thinking about changing individual behaviors, but it does have ripple effects into what institutional and societal cultural impacts are. So, as our refresher of what needs to be sequenced and what's not, and I did not even do this on purpose, I was just naming things. So when you make this grid, you could be looking at one specific workshop, but you could also be looking at a semester's worth of things. So if this were our semester of topic areas, you have in that aspects column, you see that it is sequenced. We do move from talking about just difference to then talking about dominance to change. And then for our outcomes and our levels, they're not necessarily sequenced in order, but we make time to hit on all of the different pieces. So you can take a macro level look at this or a micro on looking at one individual thing. Dope, let's talk about process paradigms very quickly. But these, I think, are some of the easier ones to grasp. So risk level. Risk level, super easy, super simple to grasp. This is the one that I think that a lot of trainings make some missteps, and it will significantly impact your participant learning, is trying to figure out what is the appropriate risk level for students to learn. I will remind folks that crying is not learning. I will say it again for those of you taking notes, crying is not learning. Sometimes people are like, I want a really deep, raw, emotional training, and like that is how they are going to know how to do all of the things. They are going to feel empathy for this person because they sobbed in the middle of my training. Crying's okay, crying's gonna happen. Some of it is raw, some of it is really vulnerable. That's just part of the work that we're doing. But our goal should never to be to make students cry. And if it happens, we should be prepared for like, how do we pivot as facilitators if students do start crying? So some things that impact risks. Timing and relationship kind of go hand in hand. So how far along are you in the timing of your sort of training? What relationships have your participants built? Do they know each other? Are they strangers? Are we doing like a day one, bare your soul type of deal? Because I did that as a student. It wasn't fun. We went on a retreat. We stayed in a yurt, and we sat in our sleeping bags on the floor of the yurt and basically went in a circle and were like, what's your life story? And someone was like, my parents got arrested because they were making meth so that I could go to school here. And I was like, wow. I don't remember what the learning was, but I only remember that. And that's not helpful. It's not. Group size. So group size works in two different directions. Sometimes if a group is really, really small, that can increase your risk level, because if we're saying, okay, we're gonna do a step into the circle activity with, it's gonna be me in this front row. And then you're like, all right, step into the circle if you're black. And I'm like, wow, this is just me by myself. This feels really vulnerable because there's not other people backing me up and sharing this experience. If a group is really, really big, you run less of that risk to be like, cool, I'm not gonna be the only one, perhaps, that shares this experience or has this identity. So I got some people backing me up, but also that means I have to reveal parts of myself to a very large group. And depending on that relationship piece, that might impact how I feel about that. We never want risk to come at the cost of student learning. If people are too afraid to participate in the learning part, kind of messes with the whole learning piece. Anonymity. Do I have the opportunity to share without people knowing that it's me? So there's some creative ways that you can de-escalate some of the risk factors by making things more anonymous. So one of my students really wanted to do like a similar to a step into a circle activity for RHA camp. And she decreased some of the risk level by saying, we're gonna do it in the dark and everybody's gonna get glow bracelets and you'll just raise your hand. And that did two things. One, it made it more accessible because we didn't have folks who couldn't step into the circle trying to not step into a circle, because everyone could sit, but you also didn't necessarily know who was saying what, but we could still have conversations about what is our group experience as a whole. I've also seen that same sort of activity where we've escalated the risk to help with some of the learning by saying like, okay, once you're in the circle, we're gonna ask you some debrief questions. We wanna ask you and invite you to talk about your experience. So it's not just silently stepping in and being like, yep, I am different, but we're going to get into some of that dominance piece by talking about what that experience means. Anonymity and sharing kind of go hand in hand. Power dynamics is another one that's really, really important, especially if you're having trainings where you've got grads and entry-level staff and maybe your mid-level staff along with students, or any combination of those. So at a previous institution, we had conversations about, well, when we have dialogues about social justice, do we want our assistant directors mixed in with our entry-level staff, or do we want the assistant directors to have their own group where they're having dialogues and conversations? I would say think about what your learning outcome is. Because when I ask people, why do we want the assistant directors mixed in? Well, they should be role modeling. Do we want them to role model or want them to learn? And is their role modeling and being in the group impacting who feels comfortable sharing and what they feel comfortable sharing? Is it more helpful to have them pulled out? Do we want them intermixed so that they are hearing these experiences that they might not be hearing? And it's a tricky thing to navigate, but always think about who is my most vulnerable participant and how can I support them in the power dynamic? So all of these are important, good risk factors. What are some other ways people have seen to maybe like decrease risk when facilitating emotional topics or vulnerable topics? Yeah?
A lot of times activities that allow people to like take on another role that might not align with their identity, so that you can still get that awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You're not having to be like the token person. Like privilege blocks and stuff can be really problematic because like if you're the person all the way in the back, that's like very jarring.
Right.
So doing things where you're taking on those identities and having to think about other person.
Yeah, that's a great way to mitigate risk. I had a student who said one time, I hate coming to these activities and trainings because I always lose the game. And that was a moment for us to be like, oh, yeah, maybe we need to switch some of that up. Yeah.
I've actually participated in and facilitated conferencing. So based on identities, where you separate the group into different rooms. And then I've done one as a professional staff as well as for our student staff, and then thinking about power dynamics. Where we ask actual staff members to step out so that there's a guest facilitator. They may actually get some information without feeling like they have to share something that comes against the person providing them.
Yeah.
I think that's been a little effective as well.
Yeah. Helpful tips. Thank you for sharing. Types of interaction. This one's also pretty simple, straightforward. So dependent, is it instructor-centered? Right now, in this very moment, we are instructor-centered. I'm the instructor. I'm saying the stuff, you're listening, you take the notes. It's great. You're also going to have things that are independent, so student-centered, whether that's your students on their own reflecting on something or in pairs, in small groups, interacting where it's not necessarily about the person facilitating, but students are able to learn from each other or other participants. And then interdependent, where you've got balance. So you might have a facilitator who's facilitating questions or a dialogue, doing some follow-up pieces and more interactive, so you've got both groups in the mix. These do not have to be sequenced, but you do want all of them. Risks should be sequenced. If that was not clear, risks should be sequenced. So for your interaction styles, you might have lectures, you could have panels, worksheets, and reflections are more of that student-focused group work, and some of the group work is also student-focused, and then facilitated discussion would be interdependent. Stage of the learning process. If you learn nothing else, if you take nothing else from this workshop, this is, I think, super helpful, super tangible, really easy to latch on to. What, so what, now what? So anytime you are structuring and framing conversations or trainings, start with what. So your what is like that subject matter knowledge, that piece of information. So what? Why should students care? Why does it matter? What impact does it have? Now what? What are we supposed to do? What actions need to happen? What behaviors need to change as a result of the information that we have? Reasons why it's important to be really sequenced. If you start at now what, they don't know why they're supposed to care. And they're just like, okay, I'm supposed to do a thing. I don't know how this impacts people or what this thing is, but I'm supposed to do the thing. If you start at so what, and you're like, okay, I know that this impacts lots of people, and I'm supposed to do a thing, but I don't know what this is. This happens a lot when we start trainings and assume that people know what things mean, that they know what a term is, that they know what a group is, that they know what social justice is or oppression, and we just start talking. And they're like, I don't know what that is, and I don't know if I should ask because I'll look dumb, but I'm supposed to care a lot and do some stuff. So if you jump too far ahead, you're losing all of the people that can't impact and make change because they don't know what they're supposed to be changing. And then it becomes stressful and they check out on you. Processing cycle, super helpful if you are someone who struggles to come up with like debrief questions. I am one of those people that I'm like, what am I supposed to ask? I'm just good at the talking part. I don't know how to facilitate the talking. Sharing. What did you guys talk about? Ask them to share what their experience is. What did you notice? Analyzing. Ask them to make meaning of a thing. What does this mean for you? What do you think that means? Generalizing. So you're asking them to generalize to a broader scale. What does this say about us as a group? What does this say about society? And then applying it. How does this apply to our work? How does this impact you as an RA? What does this mean for you as a student leader? She's got a fun little acronym, SAGA. You go on a journey. Journeys should be sequenced. I ain't even make that one up. That one was in the book. So that one should be sequenced. We're gonna practice again. We're gonna do a quick review. Oh goodness. Type of interaction, does not need to be sequenced, should be mixed. Stage of the learning process, does need to be sequenced. Processing cycle, sequenced. Cool, so we're gonna practice with this session that you are currently in. So at the top of the session, we talked about our best and worst facilitation experiences. Risk level, low, medium, high. I said low, medium, and here's why. We have some potential power dynamics in the room. We got people that are job searching in the room. We got people that know people at the institution you might have been talking about. They might know the person that you were talking about that facilitated the thing. So there is some level of power dynamic in this room, especially if you're talking about something that wasn't positive. So not super, super high risk, but sharing with strangers can have an increased risk level. It would have increased the risk even more, so I said best or worst. If I said best and worst, increase risk level. If I just said share and experience, decrease risk level, because you can kind of scan and talk about anything. Interaction level, was that dependent, independent, or interdependent? I'm hearing lots of mixed things. It was independent. I just asked you a question. Y'all did all the talking and did the things. I asked you to share afterwards, but that was just still you sharing what you talked about in your group. So that was all participant focused. Whoop, I gave you the answer. So the learning process, was that what, so what, or now what? It's a little bit of a mix of both, because we're like, what was that experience, as well as you're talking about what impact did that have on you? Processing cycle, were you sharing, analyzing, generalizing, or applying? Crushing it. When I talked about needs assessment, risk level, low, medium, high. Yeah, we sounded hesitant about that. It was just me talking. There's no risk for you. That's okay. If you want to build in those spaces and those breaths into your training, it shouldn't all be like share, 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 give me your soul, bear yourself. Give people a break. Interaction, is that dependent, interdependent, or independent? Yep, it's all me. It was my show. Learning process. We got some what? We got some so what? It was more so what? What is needs assessment? What are the types of needs assessment? How do you do this? And for our processing cycle. Crushed it. For when we went over our content paradigm, so not the quiz, not the check for understanding pieces, not practicing the grid, but just talking about the content paradigms. Incredible. Interaction. Yep, it was all me. Ooh, showed you again. Learning process. We talked about what is this information and what impact does it have, right? We went through if you do it incorrectly, if you stage it incorrectly, how does this impact your learning? So that's where that so what piece comes in, processing cycle. Analyzing, we're looking at different structures. What do these things mean? Our check for understanding. So when we did the quiz and we did our practice, low, medium, high. I could see some medium, right? Because there is the impact of I am being quizzed. I could be wrong. I was called on to ask why I thought I gave this answer that wasn't the answer that was listed, right? There's a certain, like, small level, but there is risk there. Interaction. Interdependent, right? We're doing some quiz questions. I'm giving feedback. We're asking more questions. We're talking through things. All of that. Learning process. Oh, there's silence. No one wants to commit. It's still what? We're clarifying in that check for understanding the content that we went over. And for our processing cycle. Generalizing and applying. We had specific examples of applications that we could use while also trying to apply this broadly to, like, what does this mean? How does this work? So good stuff. And again, I will remind you, I'm not going home with you, but if you live somewhere great, maybe I could. I don't know. If anybody's in Miami, maybe if you need some consulting, I got you. Make it make sense for you. My answers don't have to be your answers. My understanding and interpretation of risk is going to be different than your understanding and interpretation of risk. What matters is how you apply this for your participants. This is a check, it's a tool, it's not an exact science. So when you're analyzing design, you essentially put all of that together. So this is an example of a completely filled out grid of the content paradigms, the process paradigms, and what learning outcomes we were hitting on various things. And this is just to check our design. Did we do everything possible to help our students learn in this space? This was actually our analysis for the academic advisors, now that I think about it. Did we hit all the learning outcomes? Did we touch on all the things that we needed to do? And if you're finding that you don't have all of the elements, or if you're missing a piece or something's not sequenced, reorder it. If you're finding that the entire thing is very instructor-centered and there's no opportunities for participant interaction, change something. If the risk is too high, decrease it. And that's when you start really getting at some of those pieces of going back to this idea of curating, that things are carefully put together and thought out. So you can still take those facilitation guides, you can take all the activities from Facebook, you can mishmash them together, and that's great, but make sure you're checking all your boxes and hitting all the things. I'm gonna go back really quickly so you can kind of see within this one. In the content one, we looked at activities over time. This is just laser focused in on one session. Risk, we don't have a ton of risk here, but it should be sequence. Interaction, we hit on all three and it's mixed. Learning process, you haven't hit the now what quite yet. It's coming, but that's intermixed and sequenced pretty well. And then your processing cycle, you also want sequenced. So for those of you that took pictures of this, this is beautiful and messy, but be careful because this has more boxes than I've taught you. So if you're looking at P7, there is no P7 because this had theoretical frameworks that were embedded in. So we were like, all right, how do we incorporate cold? How do we incorporate epistemological development theory? I don't want to give you theories that don't make sense to you or your campus. But this also means that if you have something on your campus, apply it here. You got a residential curriculum, make it a column. If there's a guiding theoretical framework that guides your department, make it a column. You want self-authorship in here, you just make it a column. So whatever is the framework that you're using, if it's a programming model, if it's a curriculum, if it's a theory, if it's a philosophy, you got a value system for your department, you just make it another column to make sure you're hitting on all the pieces as well as your learning outcomes. Oh, we are right at time. So facilitation, we are going to fly through. There's essentially 4 different types of facilitators. You may identify with many of them or have some sort of blend. There's the conductor. That's me. I'm a conductor. When I step into a room, you're on my train. We are going where I want to go. We are not deviating. I'm not being like, yeah, let's just walk in and talk about anything. I have a plan. It's facilitator focused. It's highly structured. I came in with a game plan. This works for some stuff, doesn't work for all things. It can be difficult for your audiences to stay engaged if you're not that razzle-dazzle of a presenter. Sometimes people are really excited to share their experience and their story, and they don't get to do that in a facilitator-focused environment. Sometimes it can feel like a lecture, but it's low risk. There's limited opportunities for it to be derailed. It's great for high energy and engaging speakers. The teacher, these are your folks that are participant-focused and highly structured as well. If you're rapidly taking notes, I'm gonna give you all my slides at the end. So it can be highly engaging because there's lots of activities and the structure helps support all of the learning, but it can be difficult to assess how people are gonna respond to your thing. So if your activity doesn't work and this is your style of how you like to facilitate, you gotta have a backup plan, and that can get a little tricky. If your time gets derailed, you gotta have a backup plan. The storyteller. So this is facilitator focused but spontaneous. This is great if you were doing a panel of some sort and you've got some killer speakers. This is the person that's just like, I've got some talking points, I know what I want to hit on, and I'm gonna just go say some stuff. This can be terrible if this person does not know what they're talking about. Nikki Giovanni, I have the opportunity to see her speak. Phenomenal. This is her facilitation style. She just showed up in a room and started talking. At one point, she was like, I think we should fund spaceships for people to go to the moon and just see Earth. I'm dead serious, but it was beautiful. But it's easy to miss some of your talking points. If you have a speaker that's not super knowledgeable on their content, it can feel like a waste of time for your participants. Audience may have a difficult time following that and be like, what am I supposed to learn from this? This is sometimes also a bad keynote. Good panel, bad keynote. The workshopper, this is my best friend. And I mean like my literal best friend is a workshopper, not this style. This style is the bane of my existence. It's participant focused and spontaneous. If you recall, I am facilitator focused and structured. Me and my best friend decided to co-facilitate something together. And they were like, yeah, no, it's cool. We're gonna have this conversation, we're gonna do this dialogue, it's gonna be great. They just showed up and started talking. I'm like, where are our slides? What are we saying? What's the outcome? They're like, no, I just like the participants to kind of drive the conversation. Like, I have things that I wanna get on, but if you go off on a tangent and it's a good tangent, I'll just let you go there. Learning outcomes be damned. And the students love it because they're like, we had such a great talk, it was such a good conversation. Like, you didn't learn anything you were supposed to. But it's super engaging. Participants learn from one another. You got super rich dialogue. It's really tailored to the conversation they want to have. But you have to be super, super good at this and have top content that you can deviate from the topic, and it's okay. Like, you have to be comfortable with getting derailed. And this isn't always going to be the best facilitation style. I had wanted you to do a written reflection, but think about this in your heart. Maybe write it down. So what's the thing that you plan on doing differently now that you've attended this workshop? And what's one way you can use the grid on your home campus? Reflect on that as you leave. Lessons learned, triggers are real. You cannot out-design a lack of practice. So if you were one of those folks that is creating these beautiful facilitation guides and then just giving them to your staff to go facilitate and not training them on how to facilitate, not practicing it, not facilitating it in a staff meeting so they know what's gonna happen, bad news. Time's gonna run away from you like it ran away from me. It's hard, keep doing it. Here's some resources, but you can get those slides. If you have any questions, here's my contact information. You can find all my slides at jaylynjanelle.com/SEAHO. Thank you. Please, please, please fill out the feedback forms in Guidebook.